And we are back with an all-new episode of Keep It. I'm Ira Madison III.
I'm Louis Vertel, and it's as if we never said goodbye, quoth the musical Sunset Boulevard, which I am proud to announce I am seeing this weekend in New York City. I cannot wait. And I'll tell you why I can't wait. One, most people seem to fucking love Nicole Scherzinger as Norma Desmond. But two, the review in the New York Times was the one non-rave. And the mid-questioning skeptical vibe of that review makes me want to see it more. I'm kind of confused. But most people seem to love Nicole.
Yeah, I was with a friend yesterday for lunch, my friend Noah, and he was telling me that he was at the premiere and that it was fucking amazing and that it sort of does Ivan Van Hove, but better.
Oh, I see. That's the guy who does like spooky theatrical retellings of things we're all familiar with.
Using cameras and screens and ruining West Side Story.
And also he did, speaking of the films of 1950s, Sunset Boulevard, he's the one who did the version of All About Eve that had Lily James in it and Gillian Anderson, and people were like, I'm not sure
it was a version
either. Yeah. And the music of PJ Harvey, whom I touted last week. Anyway, I rewatched the 1950 Sunset Boulevard this week. Apparently, Gloria Swanson in that movie playing this fading movie star who a screenwriter, a down-on-his-luck screenwriter kind of runs into, and they both try to rehabilitate each other, and then she gets crazier, and it's this film noir experience. I'm sure you've seen it. But do you know what the scariest part of that movie is? It's not when she becomes violent or highly delusional. The scariest part of that movie is when Norma Desmond out of nowhere goes, I've written a screenplay, and then just pulls it out. Like, what on earth are you writing? Who gave her a typewriter?
You know, Norma Desmond would have hated podcasts.
Oh,
we didn't need dialogue. We had faces.
Oh, picture her sitting with the Victrola and our voices are coming out of it. Absolutely not.
That is a fantastic movie.
Oh, yeah. You know what's shocking about that movie is that it's so watchable and intense and suspenseful, even though most of the movie is him doing voiceover. Like, he's telling you what's happening and telling you this guy's inner monologue. I'm talking about William Holden here, who had an amazing 1950 because he starred in that. And he also starred in the movie that won Best Actress, beating Gloria Swanson, Born Yesterday with Judy Holliday. So anyway, that's how you do the year 1950. Thank you, William Holden.
It's interesting you bring up the voiceover, too, because I think that obviously that was a film noir trope at the time. And there are certain movies where obviously it's overdone and it feels like it shouldn't work. And maybe that's because these were maybe the originators, or you sort of don't mind. I'm thinking of Billy Wilder directed Sunset Boulevard, and I'm also thinking of Double Indemnity as well.
Maybe that's definitely the best film noir movie. Definitely.
Yeah. And the best one that handles voiceover.
Yeah,
you know?
Right.
But it just works in these movies, you know? And it also feels like the voiceover feels like a character. It feels, I mean, to bring up a podcast, you know, it feels like you're listening to something that is propulsive. It feels like a story's being told. It feels like you've got a beginning, middle, and end. You know, there's urgency to it. I feel like a lot of voiceover in movies since then is just people talking.
Right. And also just like a way to make the story relatable in too obvious a way. Like, you know, like here's your friend in the movie leading you in or whatever. And also it's a little bit of a Gone Girl situation where the person in the voiceover, it's like, do we like this person? What's going on here? And, you know, because he's deeply cynical. The point of view of the movie is extremely cynical.
Also,
anyway,
great opening.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Yes, exactly. And you have no idea how you're going to get there. It begins with a pool. Also, the other thing that's awesome about the original movie, and I wonder how much of this is preserved in the stage show, which is, of course, written by Andrew Lloyd Webber and is not the exact same thing as the movie. The references to older movie stars, like it constantly is like, you know, it's a movie that takes place in the Hollywood system. So you're talking to writers who are like, oh, could we get a Tyrone Power type in this role? You know, I love that. People referencing the feel of being in the business. You know, it's what Ryan Murphy's Hollywood was going for. And I don't know that I would put it on the same level as Sunset Boulevard, but
I actually appreciate that about films of that era too. It's a thing that people reference all the time. It's not a new observation, but about like Shakespeare, for instance, right? It's when people try to knock, say, like a 30 Rock or something for making contemporary pop culture jokes, it's Shakespeare was doing that too. Sunset Boulevard was doing that too. It's just that we don't recognize the references anymore.
Right. You have to look a lot of it up. Like some of them don't seem like contemporary references or whatever. But a total pleasure. And also great fall viewing right in my intrigue pocket that I was talking about last week.
I actually was going to ask like your favorite Billy Wilder film, but I think mine's Double Indemnity. I think it's just obvious for me.
Yeah, I mean, lots of good answers. Lots of good answers. Yeah, I love The Apartment. I mean, I think I would say Sunset Boulevard because it's got 4 awesome characters. I even love this screenwriter chick who has like a subplot that's like the least interesting part of the movie, but her like Hollywood ambitions are very real. Also, and she talks about how she grew up in Hollywood. I love the flourishes of that character. And she was like 20 years old at the time, got an Oscar nomination. Her name is Nancy Olson. She lived until about last year. Like you could go to Sunset Boulevard screenings and an original cast member of that movie, an adult, would be at the screening.
Yeah. It's fun because I think also he's really good at, to bring up Double Indemnity, movies at that time where people playing against type. Obviously, you have Barbara Stanwyck playing a femme fatale in Double Indemnity. And speaking of movies going against type, to continue our Oscar season rolling along, I saw Gladiator 2 last night.
Oh my God. I have to say, when these movies are unmasked to us well ahead of time and we get these screenings and we get to see them like two months ahead, it's like opening your Christmas presents early. Like I need to save some of these for the big moment because you want to be a part of the discussion when they occur. That said, this is like the biggest epic of the season. So what did you think?
It's the only epic.
Yeah, I mean, like we do have Wicked and we do have Dune 2, which occurred, Yeah.
But honestly, I mean, there's a lot of talk about how men cry during the first one.
Yeah.
It's a man movie that allows men to be in touch with their feelings. I cried during this movie too.
Oh God. Wow. Would you say it's better than the first one?
No, it's very different. It's a sequel, but it's more. I would actually say it's the Scream 2 to Gladiator Scream.
Oh, okay.
If
so
that makes sense.
That means it ups the stakes, but keeps the same suspense and love. And there's a couple of haircuts that make you want to scream.
And Denzel Washington is very similar to Laurie Metcalf, actually. Okay. In this movie, his performance with the rings and the robes, the dress that he's talked about already in his interviews. Actually, you know what I described Denzel Washington as? I was sitting next to writers Michael Cubey and Hunter Harris during a screening. And first of all, we cracked up at every single Denzel line. I know the theater was sick of us, but they weren't bad. They weren't like, oh, this is so bad. Like we're laughing. They were like perfect line readings. Like it is Denzel's movie.
I would say, when's the last time you've ever reacted or we've ever reacted to a Denzel performance like that? I'm so psyched.
Training Day.
It sounds like a delicious performance. Quoth Kate Blanchett talking about Judi Dench in No Ton of Scandal.
It's maybe his most delicious performance since Training Day. And he is giving, I kid you not, Nichelle Nichols in Truck Turner.
Allow me to slow down because you just said that. Nichelle Nichols.
If you told me his inspiration was Nichelle Nichols in the movie Truck Turner, then I would believe you.
Oh my God, I have like a splitting happy migraine because you said that. That's so shocking. How's Paul Mescal, who, as you know, I believe his energy is he's 1'7" and he wears tiny little shorts from like Zara alone, but then an expensive blouse.
But he's so tall in person.
He is. Okay.
I ran into him in the theater. He was there for a talk back, as well as Connie Nelson, and Denzel was there as well.
Jesus.
He's great. I mean, he's bulky. He's good. He gives man. He really sort of transforms in a way that I wasn't expecting, that you wouldn't expect from normal people after Son Paul. You know?
Yes. Also, by the way, in Gladiator 2, there's a scene where they put sharks into the amphitheater or whatever. And this is like loosely based on something that could have occurred at one point because they did flood the Roman amphitheater at some point. That said, putting sharks, I mean, it's like Dr. Evil level. I mean, what's happening here? Girl, there weren't sharks in that. Come on. What book did you get that from? Ridley.
Yeah. I had a big fucking great time. So.
Oh my God, I'm so psyched. I mean, and speaking of Oscars, we'll be talking this episode about Anora, the new Sean Baker movie starring Mikey Madison. And I've got to tell you, the Best Actress race this year is very intriguing to me because nobody is really jumping to the fore in terms of has to win. I mean, Mikey Madison is such a new name. We know her from the Scream 5, and we know her from Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But this performance, which I think is mesmerizing and fabulous, it would be so weird if someone won an Oscar for being that new. I mean, we haven't had one of those in a while, particularly in the Best Actress category.
Speaking of Scream,
yes,
Mikey Madison, one of my favorite recent Ghostface killers. I mean, she
inhabited what a killer should be in the movie when she's unmasked and what you learn who this person is. Yes.
Also, did you know? I mean, you're not a TikToker, but her moment at the end, where she's confessing to Gail that she killed Dewey, like she calls him a pussy, is a trending reaction on TikTok. Like people acting out that scene. It's so fucking funny.
We have put Gail through it. Jesus Christ. I
can't believe that bitch is coming back for another movie.
Yeah, no kidding.
Her and Sydney.
God.
What are they doing?
They should come with like head bandages and like smoking. I mean, like the most jaded people who ever lived. And nonetheless, I am very excited to see Nev and Courtney again in those movies. Okay, so we've got Nora. What else is happening this episode, Ira?
Well, unfortunately, Liam Payne passed away this week.
What a mind-boggling headline. Had to read it 3 times. I was in the middle of a meeting at work and had to announce it to 15 other writers. And we were in the middle of like an actual pitch or something at the moment. It was over. I was immediately going through the 1D archives after that. What a shocking and sad story.
Announcing it to people, and then also the shock of, we'll talk about it, but the initial shock of just how it was presented to us via TMZ with photos of his dead body.
Insane.
They were partial, but it was horrifying. And so that news sort of like came out of, obviously like a death comes out of nowhere a lot of times, but it is weird to just be in the social media era where it was crazy because you could see videos of him, social media footage of him in Buenos Aires literally half hour before he died.
I mean, he was on Snapchat like a half hour beforehand or something. It was wild. Yeah.
So we're going to talk about that and revisit One Direction as well. Last Wednesday, former One Direction member Liam Payne died in Buenos Aires after falling from a hotel balcony. The singer was only 31, and since his death, his friends and fans have flooded the internet with remembrances of his talent. Today, we're going to take a look back at Liam's legacy and at One Direction's everlasting impact on pop culture.
I mean, let's just reiterate what a tragedy this was. We talked about how we both heard, and then we were immediately flooded with images from TMZ that showed parts of his body there. I mean, like it wasn't graphic to the point where you see face or anything like that, but it was unbelievably shocking. So 1, you were confronted with this horrible news, and then 2, you were confronted with how we get this kind of news, which was just insane. But thinking about One Direction, I mean, like as we've been talking about, Billboard has done a list of like the 25 biggest pop stars of the 21st century, and One Direction was listed, I think, somewhere in the 19 range or something. They were not just an undeniable phenomenon, like you weirdly got to know all 5 of them in a way that I feel like you didn't even really with something like NSYNC. Like they all had distinct personalities and what they contributed to the band. Like, what Niall contributed, what Zayn contributed. We can compare all of their solo output. All 5 of them were discoveries on X Factor. They were put together into one supergroup, and then they became the phenomenon that they were. And they were also charming together. And then also it seemed to sour pretty immediately too. It seemed like all 5 of them had an experience with the group that was immediately overwhelming, as they had 4 consecutive Billboard albums that also all went to number 1. I feel like as long as they've been famous and long as they've been adored, there's also been this like checkered, they got too big too fast, has always been my perception of One Direction. Though if I had to pick a favorite song of theirs, it would be one that Liam co-wrote. And this is a low-key karaoke banger. When you put this on, everybody sings it. The best One Direction song is Night Changes.
That's a great song. I love No Control.
Interesting choice. Do you know what I was just confronted with? Okay, so did they have an early song called Little Things?
Yes.
I had never heard this song before. It has like 500 million views or whatever. And like you watch it, and I don't think of One Direction as an old boy band. Obviously, they occurred like 14, 15 years ago. Watching that video, you feel like you were watching New Kids on the Block. You realize how young they were. How like like the hairs and the look have changed and evolved. Like extremely over the years, and obviously they're not like teenagers anymore. But wow, it's mind blowing to be confronted with how young they were and how in control of being like singers and songwriters they were even then, even though they were thrust into the spotlight.
I mean, even from the "What Makes You Beautiful" video to the "Kiss You" video, which is like, you had two different albums, they just this complete sort of like glow up and sort of image change, and we did really get to watch them grow up. And I'm glad you brought up "Night Changes." I love that song. I love "Story of My Life" as well. That's another sort of karaoke banger. "Night Changes" is a great song that Liam did co-write, and I think I wrote about this in my Substack last week, the fact that Liam was a songwriter. And what was really interesting and that a lot of people didn't know about a lot of their songs was that Liam and Louis, the majority of the songs in One Direction were co-written by both of them. You know, they were the chief songwriters in the group. Obviously, sometimes like Harry would write a few things, and Zayn as well. And then the other one was there. But, you know, I think that really Liam contributed a lot to the songwriting of One Direction and sort of what the group sounded like, really. And as they matured and as he matured and as their relationships actually changed, I think that once we got to Midnight Memories, once we got to Four is a fantastic album, by the way. I think just start to finish is a great rock album. It sounds like a mature rock band, and you get to see, you know, all of the growth that they've had as artists.
He was also one half of what I believe is the only reality show judge and contestant relationship I can think of. He was with Cheryl Cole, famously of Girls Aloud. They have a child together.
Yes. Now, she was a judge on X Factor when he first started on X Factor.
Correct.
We don't have to talk about that.
Moving on. Girls, be quiet.
We could also be quiet about the time she beat up a bathroom attendant.
Oh, did that happen?
Yes.
I've always like connected to her because she sort of is like if Kate Beckinsale were a pop star. That is her energy to me.
I mean, that's her general vibe.
Yeah. And people, by the way, gay men who don't stand Kate Beckinsale, unacceptable. Love Kate Beckinsale.
I mean, I think I've told this story once before that I think Beyonce had told Kate Beckinsale once that Serendipity was one of her favorite movies.
Could that be less shocking? That's so right. Love and Friendship is the best Kate Beckinsale movie, followed by Last Days of Disco. Moving on. Yeah.
Her sitting at home watching that fall movie with John Cusack and Kate. It's a classic.
Yep. In recent years, Liam Payne was with this model influencer, Maya Henry. They had a falling out that seemed very serious. Like he'd been trying to reach out to her for years and years. She rejected it. It felt like there's a darkness surrounding Liam Payne in his recent years, and like the toxicology report from the autopsy was downright harrowing. It was basically a list of everything you'd expect in a harrowing toxicology report. But the nature of his death, as we said before, we saw him on social media so recently before that it must have felt like some sort of manic moment or something. Like it's a very it's once you start thinking about it, like a lot of theories flood your brain. It's just a lot is possible, and it's all extremely tragic.
Yeah. What's interesting about One Direction, I want to say, is that I remember them starting out, obviously, with the X Factor and the What Makes You Beautiful era, and particular being, maybe we were a little too old for them at that point, but they had a sort of gay fan base because they were young and they were twinks. But then they sort of grew up into adults, and what really happened is that I think maybe it was because of the sort of shifting ideas of pop music in general. You know, I think a lot of people started taking pop music more seriously. Music critics started to, the Pitchfork sort of crew started taking pop music more seriously as well. I think that One Direction started being respected a bit more as pop artists. The music got better, for one. And I think that we started respecting them as a group more right around 4 and Midnight Memories. Like, the songs were great. The writing was good in sort of a way that it took a while for people to sort of retroactively like the songs of, say, NSYNC or Backstreet Boys or Britney Spears, you know?
Yeah. Well, also, I mean, like, this is a weird comparison, but like, when people talk about the Beatles, if they had stayed the same kind of music they made in like 1964, like the Please Please Me, like I Want to Hold Your Hand, they would have shriveled so much faster. Like, they needed to evolve in order to not just like keep their fan base, but expand it and gain respect ultimately, you know. And also they basically lasted about the same amount of time. It was just like a 6 or 7 year period that One Direction was extremely popular in. I will say, if I had to pick a greatest solo moment from any One Direction member, I think I have to go with This Town by Niall. I think that's the best of the solo outputs. And by the way, I'm ignoring all of Harry's House. I know we're supposed to love Harry's House. Album of the year winner at Harry's House. But This Town is a banger single.
Well, you know, we don't really listen to Harry on this podcast, but I love Liam. Strip That Down.
Strip That Down was definitely his best work. Liam also released one of the most derided albums of the past 6, 7, 8 years or so. A shockingly bad album. Like, I think about that moment a lot, actually, because obviously there was this halcyon days period of One Direction where, you know, seemingly everything they touched turned to gold. And then you have an album of your own and it flops. I mean, like, what does that fill you with? Like, do you hate the fans for turning on you? Do you hate critics for turning on you? Like, you know, it went so awry in a way. I wonder how detached you can be from that kind of failure.
Really am remembering that era, and that album was dragged to hell and back.
In a way that nobody expected. I mean, there's so many people that, like, we're sort of prepared to drag. Like, oh, here comes this person again with their middling efforts or whatever. But I think nobody expected that album to be like that. You know, no one expected him to be like the butt of a joke at that moment.
Yeah, and it's interesting that I feel like when Zayn first came out, his first album was pretty good. I think it was well received. And then, if anything, I would say that Zayn's music didn't really become, it wasn't critically derided. I would say it's sort of just filtered into the background.
Yeah,
You know, Zayn would release something and you would sort of maybe find it on Spotify in like New Music Friday or something, but it was less an event as it was for Mind of Mine was like a big event in 2016.
Oh, you know, Pillow Talk, a #1 hit. Like, we expected Zayn to be the breakout star for years and years and years, and now I'm like Googling, remember Zayn.
And it's, I don't know, looking back at, obviously, you know, a lot of the struggles that all of them had coming out of One Direction, Liam and Zayn were both people who sort of seemed to struggle with being in the group. They were the two people who sort of derided the group publicly and spoke ill of the group, or you sort of put their contributions to the group higher than everyone else's. Zayn is at least someone who seems to have gotten past that hump of a lot of the issues that he was dealing with post One Direction, but Liam still seemed to be stuck in a lot of them post One Direction.
If you haven't read Remembrances of Liam Payne, one that I found really touching was Louis Tomlinson. First of all, he referred to him as Payno, which I guess is a nickname they had for him. So it's just immediately endearing, and you get a real sense of the relationship they had because of One Direction and in spite of One Direction. Like how they forged a real bond, even though the crucible of tension and expectations placed on that group would, I think, naturally split them all apart. It was cool to see that they still had some sort of communications about working together again.
And it's important to remember that this wasn't a group that was friends who came together and were making music in their garage or something. You know, this is the very unique phenomenon of these people were put together by Simon Cowell. On X Factor.
Much like, as you can see on my shirt, if you're watching this on YouTube, Cat's Eye, which is still on Pop Star Academy, which you can watch on Netflix. Why is this not the most popular show on Netflix? Why? It's so
Please watch it
to me. Yeah.
Please watch it so they'll release another song.
Right. And like I can say the words like Daniela's my favorite today and you'll understand it. Please. Yeah.
Well, you have to use K-pop terminology, Louis, and you have to say your bias is Daniela.
Oh man, I'm deeply unfamiliar. I need to like Urban Dictionary all of that.
Yeah, your bias is that's who your favorite is.
Okay, got it. Cute. I'll remember that. You're like Who Weekly today, telling me all about the terms I don't know.
But yeah, I mean, they were put together, and it's we experienced some of that in our early pop music that we listened to. But I mean, obviously, some of NSYNC and Backstreet Boys, a couple of those members were put in there by Lou Pearlman, but still the core of those groups were people who had grown up together or were related and sort of had bonds that are still strong, going into adulthood. One Direction, for all intents and purposes, like, have no reason to still interact with one another once One Direction is done,
Right, they
But
were
they still
fan cast. They were fan cast. Like we watched them each audition and be like, oh, that hairstyle belongs with that hairstyle. Let's put them together. Like it was downright impersonal in a way.
And it is just a weird way to make music, but it is sort of how we make music corporately now. And I think it's just sort of beautiful that something came out of this fan casting moment from X Factor, a group that means a lot to so many people. I mean, you see all of the remembrances of Liam, all of the Directioners writing about the time when they were writing One Direction fan fiction or, going to concerts. And this was like, you're thinking about the Eras tour this past year, like people were going to One Direction concerts like they were going to the Eras tour.
Anyway, Liam Payne was 31 years old. He's shockingly young. I mean, it's just an unbelievably tragic story that it still hasn't quite hit me. Even reading the One Direction statement about it still feels extremely strange. And at any rate, the music will live on because it is some of the most popular music of the 21st century.
Yeah, I was actually kind of shocked this weekend to hear some of the One Direction songs that I was hearing played either in a bar or at a party by people who you sort of wouldn't expect listen to One Direction. But as it turned out, friends of yours listened to One Direction, or at least they were so popular that people have one or two One Direction songs that they kind of love that maybe you never knew that they even listened to.
Yeah, well, also it's like it's filtered into the canon in a way. We're divorced from the moment of it. Now we can just respect the fact that they did give us big pop musical hooks and stuff,
There is just something so weird about losing Liam and then just the urgency with people need it, demand it, like a response from Harry and Niall and Zay. It's like, I don't want to know what any of them think. I know what they think, They lost someone who was important to them. I don't need a statement from them on Instagram.
Right. No, they don't owe anybody comforting. It's very strange. You're right.